Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's P&G Alumni Network Enrichment Series webinars. This is your host, Ileana Rojas, and I hope you're all safe and well. And I'm very excited for our guest today, Angie Hicks, who will share her personal story of entrepreneurship, detailing growing a company and highlighting how to navigate through changes, pulling from her personal experiences learned through 25 years in business. Angie is the Chief Customer Officer at ANGI Homeservices. Previously, Ms. Hicks co-founded Angie's List in 1995 and served both as the company's Chief Marketing Officer and on its board of directors, leading up to the merger with IAC's HomeAdvisor in October of 2007 to form ANGI Homeservices. ANGI Homeservices and HomeAdvisors are headquartered in Denver, Colorado, and Angie's List remains headquartered in Indianapolis. Ms. Hicks earned her Master's of Business Administration from Harvard Business School and a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from DePauw University, which has honored her with a Distinguished Alumni Award for Management and Entrepreneurship and with the Robert C. McDermond Medal for Excellence in Entrepreneurship. In 2019, Ms. Hicks won the Indiana Commission for Women Torchbearer Award for Entrepreneurial Accomplishments, and in 2014, she was chosen to deliver the annual Hazelett Women in Leadership Forum lecture. In 2016, Ms. Hicks was named the Women Tech Founder of the Year, and in 2017, she received both the TechPoint Trailblazer Award and Harvard Business School's Alumni Achievement Award. Angie, we're so excited to have you here. I can't tell you. And before we start and jump in to kick off this conversation, let me stop my screen so we can fully see you. Okay. Can you see my screen? No? I did remove it, right?
Yep, you got it moved, right. Good morning.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your wonderful story. And to kick off this conversation, can you share a little bit more about Angie's List and what led you to start the company, and what were some of your initial hurdles?
Sure. So I started Angie's List in 1995 when I graduated from DePauw. So I met my co-founder, Bill Osterly, when I was an intern in college. He worked at a ventures capital firm in Indianapolis, and I interned with him. I always kind of look fondly back on that time. When I was at DePauw, I knew I wanted to do something in math or probably economics or something like that. But I didn't really have any background or experience. I was the first in my immediate family to go to college, so I didn't really have perspective on these things. So as I was interviewing for internships, I didn't really know what I was interviewing for in many ways. So when the director suggested I interview at the venture capital firm, my knowledge of venture capital firms is probably that they invested in small companies. That was probably it. But I went to the interview and had a good conversation. But it was quite humorous. I mean, I think the first question Bill asked me when I went to the interview was whether I was as smart as the person who had interviewed just before me at math. And I was like, how do you answer a question like that in an interview? So I answered honestly that if he wanted the math person, the guy that interviewed ahead of me was probably the better choice. We had a good conversation, and he ended up offering me the position. And as we look back years later, he was always quick to say that the highlight on my resume at that point was Employee of the Month at Ryan's Steakhouse for those of us who had been in the Midwest in the 80s and 90s. And he thought I could use a break. And it's one of those scenarios where sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for, and opportunities present themselves, and you should just take them because you don't know where they'll lead. So I interned with Bill, and then during my senior year, I really thought I wanted to work at a small company. So I started sending off, it was 1995. I was mailing resumes off to small companies with my cover letter resume and not really hearing anything back, and ended up getting an offer to work in consulting in Washington, D.C. And before I accepted that offer, Bill came to me and said, "Hey, I was thinking that I wanted to start a business. So why don't you forget about your offer? I know it's a crazy idea, and why don't you move to Ohio," which is where he was. He was in Columbus. and let's start a business. And so I him-hawed around about that for quite some time, talked to my parents, talked to my grandparents, trying to figure out what was a good idea. And I think the best advice I got was from my grandfather, who said, what's the difference between being 22 and looking for a job and being 23 and looking for a job? Why don't you go ahead and give it a shot? I think you'll be fine. So the day after graduation, I packed up my Ford Escort and off I moved to Columbus, Ohio, not knowing a soul other than Bill and his wife, and we started what would become Angie's List.
I got such an interesting story. Now, growing a company from 2 employees to thousands, I imagine, is quite the journey. Can you share some of the peaks and pitfalls you encountered along the way?
Sure. So, it's always been, I mean, I think, I worked by myself probably for the full first year, which was incredibly hard. I mean, I kind of did everything out, but I was a very quiet, shy person. And we had a business that we were patterning Angie's List after. It was a company called Unified Neighbors that started in the 70s in Indianapolis. But Unified Neighbors had built up their business by going door to door selling consumer memberships. And so we didn't have a marketing model. So the idea was that I would take calls from consumers. They could ask me who to hire. So it was calls back then. I mean, email was barely a thing in 1995. So people would call in and say, I'm looking for a plumber to, kind of fix a leaky faucet. And I would give them a list of plumbers. Uh, and then in the evening, I'd actually go door to door selling memberships, which was a horrible experience for someone as quiet and shy as I was. I mean, when I look back on it, I'm like, I measured my sales in 1 or 2. Like if I had 2 sales or 3 sales, it was the best day ever. But we quickly realized that that probably wasn't a great way to scale the business. I think within the first year we had 1,000 members, and realized that we should probably think about something other than door to door and home shows as our sales venue. So we started some marketing, and we became local marketers. So we opened this city by city. We were in Columbus. Columbus, if for those of you in Ohio, I mean, has a really good network of local little newspapers, neighborhood newspapers. So we'd advertise there. And we've successfully figured out how to get the phone to ring for people to call in and say, hey, I'm looking for this or that. And the list, we turned 1 or 2 sales a day into 10 or 12 sales a day, and the business was, it was turning. And we understood how the model would work. We understood from Unified Neighbors how that service would work. And then we had the opportunity in a year later to actually buy Unified Neighbors, which was the Indianapolis business. So then we were a roaring success of 2 cities. I was one person that was driving back and forth between those cities trying to keep the lights on. Ended up hiring a couple of part-timers in each city and just hoped that they would come into work unsupervised, answer the phones, and lock the door on their way out. I'm incredibly grateful for those early employees, because they were, who knows where it would have been had it not been for their dedication.
Wow, definitely. And trust, it seems to be a big issue, still a big thing, value nowadays even. What have been
Right.
some of your biggest learning moments as the company kept growing?
Sure. So, I think one of my favorite stories is, we would open city by city. We truly believed that knowing local service, you had to be local. So we had physical offices in the cities we opened. So our 4th city that we opened was actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had a friend that lived down in North Carolina, and Charlotte struck us as a city that was similar to Columbus. I mean, it was a young city. It had lots of growth, and we thought there was real opportunity for it to take off there. So we opened in Charlotte, and did everything that we did in the other cities. So we started our little advertising in little weekly newspapers. We would advertise in the daily newspaper, NPR. But also, one of the things that we had found early on in the business was that getting initial media, getting press early on in that local city was key to kind of getting the chapter, as we called them, off the ground. And it was interesting in Charlotte. For some reason, to this day, and we've opened kind of across the country. Charlotte might have had the most difficult media market there was. We could not we could not get a story placed. We could not. And because of that, Charlotte kind of grew kind of slowly. I even hired a local PR firm and thinking like, hey, they've got the contacts. They're from Charlotte. They'll be able to help us. And we still couldn't do it. So Charlotte was honestly the first, kind of the only city in our opening process that we contemplated shutting down. And what we discovered was like, well, we decided we would just pull back its marketing. We would pull back the investment we were making in that city and just see if it could organically grow. And it did. And then finally we did get the story in the Charlotte Observer and and things like that, that made it take off. But it was an example of just like, it was so funny because it was a city that felt like it was a lot of people moved to that city and not a lot of people were from Charlotte, but it was a city that was hard to break into. It was just an interesting example. I think the other thing that we learned early on as well is the reason why most businesses are started in big cities. We started in the Midwest. We started in the cities that people oftentimes don't start in, and we we realized because we danced around opening in Chicago for a long, long time, probably a couple of years to be quite honest. And because it was going to be a bigger risk, right? We didn't capitalize the business with a ton of money. We kind of raised funds as we needed them. So to open Chicago was going to be a bigger check to write. And when we finally did it, what we realized was, bigger cities have lots more people, so your advertising works a lot harder. So when looking back in retrospect, it was one of those where it was like, had we opened some of those bigger cities earlier, that the business would have taken off and been a lot faster, even earlier than it actually was. So kind of risk reward is what we learned, but we also did the hard stuff first. So those opening in the Midwest cities, we knew our business would work there. So it wasn't like we had a business that was only going to work in, 5 or 6 of the largest cities in the country.
A lot of great learnings, and especially I imagine by the time you being the driving leader within the growth of this organization. So as you look back, what do you think was the defining moment for you as a
That's a great question. For me, I think, I ran the business, and kind of there for 3.5 years before I left, and then I left for business school. I think the challenge for me is I was very young, kind of starting a business. I mean, let's be honest, I didn't know what I didn't know. And Bill wasn't in the business day to day at that point, and it was hard. It was hard. So for me, I was really burnt out. Like in fact, probably had I not left for business school, I may not have come back. I might have left permanently. So I went off to business school. And for me, it was a chance to really kind of think about all the things I'd been exposed to and really kind of put things into perspective. And in fact, I later then, even after I got out of business school, I actually interviewed with other companies. I wasn't sure whether I was going back. And consumer marketing was the area I was most interested in and spent time interviewing. And what I realized during that process was, it really comes down, it's less about what you do or where you do it, but more about the people you work with for me. And so I tell young people this all the time. It's like, you could do marketing anywhere. But are you working for someone that really cares about you, that's going to invest in your future and kind of really become a mentor? Because that's what's going to make a difference, much more than whether you're, selling widgets or or hamburgers. I don't care. I mean, marketing is marketing in many ways. Um, so I remind people of that. And so, I was actually in an interview and I was interviewed by someone, and literally the person would ask me a question, I would give them an answer, and the person would literally, without a smile, without any expression, just say thank you and ask another question. And I was like, this is the person I'm going to work for. This is like, I should be excited and inspired by this. So, after that process, I realized I needed to go back to Indiana. I needed to go back to Angie's List, because that was where I was, going to learn from great people and be able to grow.
You touch on so many interesting points that have been relevant for many years, but I think now more, with this new environment, the importance of people and those connections, not only about, you mentioned what you do and how you do it, but the importance of the people that you work with. And I think that many of us didn't realize that until we're basically, don't have that day-to-day connection as we used to have it before. So such an important point that you bring up. And I just want to remind everybody that's listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to send some through the questions feature or the chat feature. I'll be monitoring them and I'll start asking them in a couple of minutes more to Angie. But going back to this people's thought and the importance of who you work with, what have you learned about people management through those years, and has your management style changed?
Yeah, it absolutely has changed. I mean, a 22-year-old manager is very different than a 40-something-year-old manager. So, quite honestly, for me, it's developing people that I can trust. I think you'd mentioned that as well. I think trust is an important element. And, I set the stage when I have someone new of like, hey, I prefer working with people that are going to kind of take risks and, make decisions than people that are going to just always ask for permission. But I have one rule, and that is that, if something goes wrong, that you come and tell me first and quickly. Because my view is, there's no harm in mistakes. We all make mistakes, but, the sooner I know about it, the quicker I can help support and solve it. So I think that is an element. I think making sure that you develop people that, shore up your weaknesses. We're not we're not all good at everything for sure. I'm a very analytical person, but so I always knew on my marketing team I always needed to have strong creatives because that wasn't always my strong suit. So how do you recognize your strengths and weaknesses, and how do you balance that in your team? Is really important. And I think for me, one of the things, and maybe it was for me because it was a hard thing, and I think it is a hard thing for a lot of people, is developing people from individual contributors to managers and leaders. I mean, that is a hard transition, especially for kind of overachievers in the individual contributor line, right? How do you let go? How do you mentor and coach someone to do what you're doing? And I vividly remember those days. I mean, I wasn't always the most patient soul when I was young, trying to teach how people how to do the things I was doing. I tell people a lot that one of the best things that happened to me was having children, because I actually had to leave and go have a child, right? So maternity leave turned out to be a wonderful thing. I'm an advocate of sabbaticals too for that reason. Uh, it forced me to actually let go of things. I remember, one of my kids was born during the time I would have bought all of our local media, and I went to the woman that was helping me do that, and it was literally probably her second time around for buying media, and I was like, okay, Trisha, I'm gonna, here you're gonna have to do this, like you're just gonna have to do it, and so I gave her a goal, and I always was. I'm incredibly frugal, so we were diligent negotiators, so I gave her a number that I wanted her to hit, and she knew she didn't want to deliver anywhere close to that number. She wanted to do better. So she gave herself another number. She came back and negotiated better deals than I had, and I never negotiated another ad contract after that. But because when you're gone long enough, it's something that you have to give other folks a chance. And I think sometimes that can be the best, that's the best approach. So I always encourage people to take that time.
Yeah, it's about, I think you talk a lot about the delegating decision making, right? And I think that's when you become a manager or a leader of some sort, that becomes something that's not easy to do because you want to be involved in every decision, and delegating that decision making becomes a challenge. So definitely an important learning. A lot has changed in the world in 25 years that Angie's List has been around, and especially the last year, I can imagine. How do you make leadership decisions to successfully navigate those changing landscapes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes me, most excited about staying on with, kind of staying involved in the company. I mean, I always look for, to this day, my two criteria are, do I like the people I'm working with, and do I feel challenged? And if those two things, if I can check yes to those two things, then I'm in the right spot. I would definitely say this last year, because definitely checked the kind of, are there challenges? I mean, there are things we just never even thought about. And I'm just fascinated by, kind of how things have changed, and kind of what, kind of what things look like in another year, right? When kind of, is it, we managed to get thousands of employees working remotely. We never thought we'd be able to do that, but we did, because, we had to. That was a necessity. And they're doing really well. We had to help small businesses figure out how to navigate the landscape of a world of COVID. They are, home improvement contractors are essential businesses, and they typically are the smallest of small businesses. So when we say small, we're like, hey, the average size of a business that's on Angie's List or HomeAdvisor is 4 people. 4. There's no big marketing or corporate team that can kind of help figure out how they're going to institute new safety measures and things like that, right? They have to figure this out on the fly while they're, still doing their trade. We spent time lobbying in support of the PPP program to make sure that these
Mhm.
smallest companies actually got represented, because they didn't have, accountants and lawyers that were going to help them apply for these loans, and things can get complicated. And I was so impressed with how these small businesses quickly evolved. I think it was maybe 6 weeks after, kind of COVID really took, kind of really hit. And by that point already, 90% of the pros reported that they had already instituted new safety measures. They were already evolving uh, their businesses, and so it'll be really interesting. I mean, video calls replaced in-person estimates. And all of a sudden the pros are realizing, oh, I can visit 4 customers during that 2-hour period instead of, 2. Will it ever go back? I don't know, but I think it's certainly opening folks up to test and try new and interesting things.
Yes, we've definitely seen the dramatic changes of how the video in a way has made us being more effective. It has
Right.
also made us work longer hours because
For
now
sure.
there's not that that time in
Yeah.
transitions. But it's great to see, the work that you've helped these small businesses, because like you say, many of them, I'm a part of a chamber of commerce, and it has been very difficult for small businesses to figure out how to pivot, because they don't have that longer term business vision, or you know
Yeah.
experience to know how to pivot their business. So that's awesome that you've been able to
Right.
do that with yours. What role do you think a company culture, and now that culture again is becoming one of those things on the rise, one of those big trends as we move forward, play in leading through, difficult situations in the past, and now the difficult situations that we're going to continue to live through at least the next couple of years?
Yeah. And I think culture is key to the success of a business. And I think that when leaders don't choose to invest in it, it doesn't mean they don't have a culture. It just means it's one that they didn't help cultivate. So I think that needs to be top of the list. Kind of like, what are the norms of working here? How do we support one another? I mean, these are basic things. I mean, my team will oftentimes say that I go back to kind of the things that I learned in kindergarten, right? How are we treating one another? Keep things simple. We're going to measure you on 3 things. Because I find that sometimes the most simple approach to things is sometimes the best. But how do you make sure that you're balancing working hard but also not taking yourself too seriously? So defining kind of who you are and what you are is a type of thing that will define being able to attract talent. These things matter to people a lot. Not only kind of your company values, your company culture, but also, how is your company playing a role in your community? What things are you doing? These things all go back and are super important. For example, our organization we do charitable giving every year, and it's completely employee driven. So our employees select based on a survey every year. We ask them what types of local charities they're interested in supporting. We have a committee of employees that actually review all the grants and select the grants based on the employee criteria. And then we donate these grants as well as align volunteer opportunities to support them. So, how are we, kind of making sure that we're not only taking care of our team but also the areas that we live.
It's part of, I see it as integrating, your culture, your purpose, your values across everything that you do, not only internally, but externally, to your point, the community inclusive. And I think that's something that many other companies also need to learn to do, and revisit as they move forward. We're
Yeah.
starting to get a lot of questions from our audience, so I'm going to take a couple of them as we move forward. Please, anybody else who's had questions, feel free to send them over. When you were talking about, the small business piece, which is an important piece of
Yeah.
your business, how much partner support services did you build for those small businesses?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we spent a lot of time over the years trying to decide, should we develop a lot of tools for them? Should we help them aggregate and get health insurance, for example, or all types of elements. And one of the things that we learned more often than not is the one thing that we provided and were incredibly successful at was actually helping them just better their business. If you think about the reviews and the intel that our team could provide, it was like, how do you really supercharge your growth, and how do you build that business? That became so. I've always thought there was almost like a mini consulting element of Angie's List, even though it was never formal, of how to grow your business, and that was certainly an element of importance. Looking over the last few last year or so, I mean, we've introduced a number of tools to support pros, especially during the pandemic. We have a payments application where pros can, collect all of their payments from both their consumers that they're getting through us as well as elsewhere through our platform. We also have a financing tool that we recently introduced, so consumers can finance projects. So maybe they were thinking about putting that swimming pool in, but we can make it a one-stop shop by being able to do that. We've introduced video chat, things like that. So there's been a number of tools that we've created to just help them run their businesses more efficiently.
That's awesome. Awesome. Uh, Going back to the time where you were in school, where you were having this learning phase from a business perspective, are there top 3 things that you learned from Harvard Business School that you integrated into your business once you went back?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one was a problem-solving mindset. I think that, in business, it's really about, seeing scenarios, being able to determine what type of problem it is so that you can determine how to solve it. I think that was one element. I think it also kind of elevating out of the weeds. I think every entrepreneur has the challenge of kind of not making sure that they're playing kind of all the way down to the final detail in the business, and I think that certainly helped as well. And then quite honestly, just um, the network and colleagues that I developed while I was there. I mean, I've been out of HBS over 20 years now. And and still I know that if something unusual comes out, I've got that core of people that I can call, and there's probably one in that group that probably has the experience that I might be trying to solve for.
You mentioned, and I think that's extremely important, the networking piece. Obviously, there's a lot of learning elements in when you go to business, but definitely that networking piece, not only there, but throughout our lives and as an entrepreneur, becomes extremely important. In your position now as, uh, a leader, an executive leader in your company, in the industry, and also as a woman. You mentioned a while back about mentorship and the importance of being a mentor to others in their professional development. Is that something? Is that something that you do today? How do you integrate that as part of continuing to build and lead the way for those future generations?
Yeah. So I think when I think about mentorship, I don't think about it as a kind of like, hey, I'm going to have one mentoree and I'm going to help them and we're going to have a 2-year mentoring relationship. I think about it every day, quite honestly. And I think, for me, I think one of the hardest things as the company grew was when the day I realized I didn't know everyone's name anymore. That was one of the hardest. That was one of the hardest days for me, I think, because I get real energy kind of seeing kind of others succeed and getting to know people. So I would introduce things that I could do to continue to develop that rapport with folks. So I had read in a book once that there was a successful executive that did office hours. They had been a professor before an executive, and I introduced office hours, where I dedicated an hour a week, and anyone could sign up in the company for a 15-minute slot. They didn't have to have an agenda before they showed up. It could be for any purpose. It could be that they had a business idea, could be that they had a grievance, could be that they just wanted to get to know me better. It could be, it could be they needed some career advice. And I found that the informal nature of that allowed me to interact and spend time with people across the organization, from kind of vice presidents in the company all the way down to our frontline call center team. And quite honestly, those experiences were probably, I would have to argue as to who they were more rewarding for, whether it was for the person that was coming in or was it for me, because I certainly learned a ton from those interactions.
Thank you for sharing that, because that's a question that I always see, at least when with the entrepreneurs that I interact. It's like, how do you build those connections with people that are not necessarily your direct reports? So that's a great advice for some of our participants and viewers today. And continuing then on that thought, with everything being virtual right now, and I would say almost 100% of our interactions, how have you seen, or what have been the best practices that either you or your teams have used to continue to build that culture, that relationship, that interaction that before could have been done in person, but now it's very hard.
Yeah, I think in some ways you have to be very purposeful. I think about the number of people that work for our organization that haven't actually met someone face to face, right? I mean, we're a year in. Um, you have to be creative and purposeful in how you do that. So, for example, one of the things that we had historically done was fireside chats. Obviously, in person, leaders would stand up and talk to the entire team in one location in the office. And we've spent the better part of 9 months really trying to make them more regular so that we went from them being, once a month to every couple of weeks, to being very engaging. And kind of it's a trial and error to kind of figure out what's the right mix. But kind of how do you get enough voices in the experience? How do you make sure you touch on the right topics? And make sure people stay engaged and excited about what we're doing. And that's something that we continue to evolve, to this day, because it's been a good tool, but we know it can always be better. I know that I've introduced, instead of, longer, less frequent meetings, I do more frequent, quicker meetings. That way there is there's interaction more often, because I do think it can feel quite isolating, when you're working alone. And making sure that you're still taking the first few minutes of every meeting talking about just what you did over the weekend and life, because that's something that can easily get interrupted. I also think I think it's a hard, where we thought we lived in a world of multitasking before the pandemic, we certainly do now, even more so. And I remind people that they need to make sure that they are, kind of setting their own boundaries and setting their own parameters, because you're absolutely right. You can literally work from the moment you get up to the moment you go to bed, and the world will let you. So how do you make sure that you set boundaries? What do you do? I mean, I remember, and this was, way pre-pandemic. I mean, like a lot of people, I would, go to sleep with my smartphone on my nightstand. And even if the ringer was turned off, I could hear it vibrate. I could hear things come in. Like, the time I decided that, and no, kind of nowhere, no longer shall my phone be anywhere near my sleeping area, it made a difference. But you have to kind of set those boundaries, and it'll be okay. I mean, and maybe it's because, I've worked long enough that I worked in the world before smartphones, before you kind of took your computer home, that, like, literally when you were on vacation, you were on vacation. Like, they would have to call the hotel and talk to you if they needed you. Um, those are times that we have to be very protective of our time like that, because um, it's easy for it not to be there, and it's super important to staying charged.
Yes. Self-care is becoming definitely another one of those rising topics. How do
Right.
you put those boundaries? Again, very easy to say, not necessarily so easy to actually
Yeah.
do that and be intentional about that. So following then on that note, what would you recommend, or what are your best practices in terms of when do you get involved and when do you let go? You talked about earlier about, learning how to let go, but being, the top of the business, making sure that things are still moving forward. I imagine that there's that urge of trying to be involved in everything, make all these decisions, and that's when the time just gets consumed. So
Hmm.
what have you found helpful in terms of when do you get involved, when do you delegate, how do you let go?
Yeah. I think part of it is also, how do you give people the space to be the expert that they are? And I think that is something that you have to practice a lot. Um, in fact, I would recall kind of times I would go to meetings and I'm like, okay, Angie, you're not going to actually answer the questions. You're going to let the silence be so that the people that are actually the experts in that area have a chance. Um, and I think it's something that people have to actively manage, because it's very easy for kind of someone that's been in an organization for a long time to be able to, on the fly, give an opinion, answer the question, um, but that doesn't allow the organization to grow. So how do you make sure that you're kind of balancing that and kind of holding back, and not to the detriment, but like making sure that you're doing it in a balanced way.
Is there, you touch on several points that I love, especially the silence piece, the power of silence, so important to let others sort of contribute versus just listening. all of these points that you talk about, I can see them perfectly being applied in larger organizations where you can have like all these different people that can support your growth. Is there any, you talked about developing all these different like manuals or toolkits for your smaller businesses, that they're also going through the same thing. They're also going through the burnout phase. They're also going through the, I have a lot of decisions to make. I have so many things to handle, but they're a small team. You mentioned some of them, up to
Yeah.
just 4 people. So it makes it harder for them to be able to delegate, for them to be able to have this additional support team. Any thoughts on how, smaller teams can still feel that they can have that space, and how to manage that, avoid the burnout, basically?
Yeah, yeah. I think especially, I think about those small businesses. I think part of it is making sure that, while you may not be able, you might be too small to have kind of breadth of folks to have mentors inside your organization. How are you learning and evolving and networking with other companies? I mean, we would do kind of back when we could do events, right? We would do events where we would bring, contractors from across the country together. And, one of the things they loved about that interaction the most was the chance to meet other plumbers from other parts of the country. So they may not want to network with the plumber that they're competing with in in Chicago, but gosh, it would be super interesting to learn from that plumber in St. Louis. And those were really valuable interactions that we've been able to create over the years. And I think that's something that's because I think sometimes we just think about who's right here, who's right near me that I can talk to. Like how do we expand that network for those folks to be able to give them, a safe mentoring relationship that they enjoy, that they can really learn from.
That's really powerful. The networking across. I think that's something that with things being online, I can imagine that being so much easier, because
Right.
now you don't have to physically be there, and like you say, you
Correct.
can then learn best practices from somebody completely on the other side.
Yeah.
That, to your point, is not your direct competitor, so to
Right.
speak. So that's wonderful. In terms of as we move into this continued new world, uh, any any insights into where do you think, at least for Angie's List, we're going to continue to, or you're going to continue to head?
Yeah. So, I think it's when I think about where we are in the home improvement industry. I mean, despite the fact that we've been in the industry for 25 years, there's still so much opportunity. Still it's a small percentage of consumers actually go online to schedule their scheduled time with their plumber. Whereas, kind of shopping has been, an online kind of industry for quite some time. So I think there's a lot of evolution, and it's super exciting to think about how when smart technology starts to couple with the ability to bring pros out in a very efficient way, could be a really game changer to caring for our homes. The things that we may not even think about as homeowners might become things that are just can happen in the background, right? My favorite example is always gutter cleaning. Like, I know I should clean my gutters twice a year because that's going to, keep my house in good condition, keep water out of my basement, you name it. But it's the chore that oftentimes gets forgotten, right? Because it shows up too low on my to-do list on a given day. But if I just knew that it was happening and it didn't engage and kind of interfere with whatever the day-to-day stream of things, I would certainly want to do it. So I think there's a lot of transformation yet ahead in the home improvement space, and I'm excited to be uh, part of that team that can lead that charge.
part of the things that I've seen are happening in across many companies is partnering with other companies and organizations that in the past you would have never even thought of partnering with because you thought it was like an industry or an area that has nothing to do with yours. And I think as we move forward, what we've learned is these collaborations and these partnerships can actually, bring not only better experiences and deliver better products and services to our consumers, but it also opens a gamut of, completely new possibilities. Any thoughts and any partnerships that this pandemic has brought to Angie's List?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always thinking about where there are opportunities to kind of solve for things. And I think, probably the most recent one was a partnership with Affirm, which is the financing company that we just partnered with, which really is allowing access to capital and allowing small businesses to be able to attract customers they may not have been able to before because they didn't have a simple solution for how to pay for that swimming pool you want to put in. So, you're always, we always are thinking about ways that we can continue to make the entire process of caring for your home simpler and easier. And it may not always be that we're the, partnering might be better than building at times. And we always make that kind of build versus partner decision.
Awesome. What makes you most proud from your tenure at Angie's List?
Oh, quite honestly, the impact we have on individuals. So I kind of stack it kind of in twofold. One, on the employees that work there or have worked there in the past. Watching people develop and go off and build their careers has been phenomenal. I share this story sometimes. I was getting off a plane a couple of years ago, and a young man came up to me and was walking out toward the parking garage, and he was just like, I just wanted to say, I worked at Angie's List right out of college, and you know you really helped to set my career out on the right trajectory. He had gone off and was doing other great fantastic things, but kind of hearing that story, kind of knowing that you're making an impact in people's lives um, is incredibly rewarding. And the same can go for, I could give you stories about contractors that we've helped build their business, or homeowners that kind of engaged in kind of taking care of their home and building projects that they may never have done without us. And that kind of human element of it is what it makes me most proud.
Congratulations. I think that impact that we can have on others definitely, it's always so rewarding. It's like the legacy that you
Right.
leave behind. I've seen, at least in my environment and where I'm at, many people starting to think about, becoming entrepreneurs themselves. Uh, that's sort of part of the next chapter. Any thoughts, any insights of that life?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think kind of part of it is coming up with your idea. I don't know that it always has to. I think sometimes we overthink the coming up with the idea. So if you think back to kind of the Angie's List origins, we actually copied another business. Like, right, there was a business in Indiana that wasn't anywhere else. So I think there is that element of like, hey, is it an idea that is truly unique that you completely come up with, or is it taking an interesting idea to other places? So thinking about that, I think also just, who you surround yourself in that original part of the journey, what kind of support system you have, is key to your success, because, kind of starting a business certainly has its ups and downs, and having a good support system is what's going to get you through, because there will be many times that you're like, I'm done with this. And that perseverance is oftentimes the thing that makes a difference.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, your story, and all the different accomplishments that you've done, not only for the people that work for you, but also for others that depend on Angie's List to be able to pay for their bills and build their life and make them better. So thank you so much for sharing those stories. It's always important to hear from others to get inspiration. Any last nuggets that you'd like to share?
I think, I oftentimes think back that like starting Angie's List was a door that opened. I think a lot of times people have that plan in life of like, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. Stay nimble because you never know what door might open for you and what it might lead to.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your time, for being with us this morning. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having
And
me. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. And let me see. Yes, we're back on my screen. So thank you everybody for being here today. I have a couple of announcements to share before we end our webinar. Let me do this. Sign up for updates in pngalums.com. Support the foundation at pngalumnifoundation.org. Partner with us at sponsor@pngalums.com. And any thoughts, any questions, if you want to start a chapter, if you have any other suggestions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at hello@pngalums.com. All of our recordings are available to you through either our website first, and then you can also access the recordings at our PNG Alumni, PNG Alums YouTube channel. So make sure that you check those out, not only this one, but also previous ones. We've had great guests in the past that you don't want to miss. Like I said, reach out to us at hello@pngalums.com, and please join us next month to celebrate Women's History Month with Melanie Healy, board member of Verizon, Hilton, Target, PPG, H Venture, and Bridgepoint Capital, who will talk about what makes a leader strong, inspiring, and effective during transformative times. So join us on March 2nd. Please note that this one is in March 2nd, it's not the second Tuesday of the month, at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And thanks again for joining us on another exciting webinar. This is your host, Liliana Rojas, and I wish you all a great rest of your day, wherever in the world you may be. Thank you for joining.